All right, we should be live on YouTube now. Okay, hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Open RFC call for NPM. Today is 26 August 2020. And let me start by sending out minutes to the Zoom participants so that you can add your name. Cool, Isaac is also helping there. Cool, yeah. And let me start by the code of conduct acknowledgement. This call and all interactions are under a code of conduct. So you can also take a look at the link here for the Zoom participants. So any announcements today from anyone here in the Zoom call?
Just the V7 beta keeps chugging along. Check it out.
And I would just add really quickly that Node 14.9.0 is likely going out today. And I believe that does have an update to NPM in it.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Yeah. So with that, we can maybe start going through the agenda here. And the first item, I see the very first item is an audit in which I was kind of expecting ZB to show up. So maybe we can put that to last, see if it gives him some time to maybe jump up during the call. And let's maybe start with a Christian PR for parent package JSON. So yeah, Christian, if you're ready.
Yeah. So last time Jordan, I think, made the comment that changing the way package JSON behaves is very much undesirable for existing tooling. So I tried to adapt the way the parent package JSON works. So the idea basically is that you can inherit overrides, dependencies, and scripts for now. Maybe in the future we'll add more, but that's kind of the basic list I want to start with. So the idea is that you can specify a file source dash package.json, and you can specify dependencies, a parent package JSON that you want to inherit from, and you can specify scripts and overrides, and NPM would just on every install and pack override these things in the package JSON so that tooling could just read package JSON like it has always done. That's the idea. Please have a read. If you have some comments, please leave them in the PR or tell me now. One of the problems that I saw was what happens if I'm just an ordinary user and decide to change package JSON myself, and then I install again. My changes could potentially be lost, which is a bit of a bummer. So maybe we would have some way to detect that. I don't know.
One possible way we could detect that is just look at the M times of the files, and if the package.json is newer than the package source.json, then we don't do that thing.
That's a very clever idea. I thought of every single possible idea I could think of, but I didn't think of that one. That's a cool one. I like that. I'll try to put that in.
It's a little bit flaky, and you need to kind of have some buffer, like give it, because there's going to be situations where like you do a git checkout and one file gets written 1 second after the other.
Yeah.
But if you give it, you figure like a human being is not going to probably open a file and edit it with less than 10 seconds of lag. So if you give it 10 or even 100-second buffer, then if it's newer than that, you ignore it. We use the same trick with the hidden lock file right now. So if any of the contents of the node modules folder are, I forget what the timeout is, I think it's 10 seconds, are more than 10 seconds or less than 10 seconds older. Gosh, now I forget now because I'm phrasing this wrong, but basically, if the contents of node modules are newer than the hidden package lock that's in the node modules /.packagelock.json, then it'll just ignore the hidden lock file and do a normal load actual.
Okay, that's a cool idea. I'll try to put it in there. That's basically all I have. However, I do have some kind of a gut feeling that it's getting cleaner with every iteration. So yeah, I think it's slowly crawling there. It's not getting there, it's crawling there, but that's fine.
So here's, I gotta say, I like this idea for a lot of reasons. One is that it simplifies out a lot of the concerns that we brought up before, right? Like the issues with like, what do we do if we see a parent declaration in a node modules package JSON? Making sure that we always flatten it prior to putting it in the tarball was going to be a little flaky, or just an easy thing to get wrong, right? The one concern that I do have, and I don't know if this is kind of a bug or a feature, is that I suspect that we will inevitably have people who want to do more stuff with that package source.json, right? So not just specify a parent, but even like build it dynamically or have a script that runs kind of to figure out what your dependencies should be or what have you. And again, I mean, this is kind of like down this road leads autoconf, right? So yeah, I'm not sure if that's a bad thing per se, but it's certainly going to be like an invitation to add ever more complicated footguns.
Honestly, I do feel very, very simply about this.
Mm-hmm.
If people want that, they can open an RFC.
Yeah.
And we'll can see
it.
where this goes from there. I would.
Yeah, I think it's probably more feature than bug, that concern, right? Because there are probably some valuable things that will come out of that, and we'll just have to continue to be thorough and careful about evaluating them, so we don't end up with just accreting every feature under the sun.
Absolutely, yes.
But yeah, I'm fine to move on. I think this is a good direction. I agree, it's getting cleaner. It's a tricky thing to implement and get right. So and it's also a hard one to come back from if we get it wrong. So I think being thorough here makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it went a lot quicker than I thought. So
yeah, cool. And I also, Isaac, I also mentioned to Kristen before we started the call that this is probably a very good one for us to hold on just ratifying it and rather waiting for the work on the implementation to start and kind of follow up, bring some feedback into the RFC before really ratifying it.
Kind of like overrides is in sort of a similar state, right? We want to like it. We all think it's good, but once we implement it, we might change our minds.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
So how would you go about that? Would you? Well, I mean, this is kind of I don't know. This feels like a stupid thing to ask, but would like the NPM folks go into like a secret hideout cabin and just try to implement it, or would you?
So I don't think. Well, we don't have a secret hideout cabin, but unless you count
Unfortunately.
Slack channels. If we do, we probably shouldn't say it in public. But,
what I'm saying is I would love to offer my help, but I have like zero knowledge of NPM.
So I think the next step here is probably, because we're only going to be doing this at pack and publish time. So effectively now we have two. I'll just kind of give you some brief guideposts. We have effectively two modules that read package JSONs, which are called read package JSON and read package JSON fast. And I think both of those. So read package JSON fast is used when we're reading package JSONs that are in the node modules folder, because, and in other cases where we don't care about getting, every possible bit of sort of implied metadata, right? We're not going to look for a Git repo. We're not going to, infer like all the different things. And all that stuff is, adds work and it's slow. So when we have to read like 2,000 package JSONs, we try to just go as fast as possible. But read package JSON fast is going to have to, that is the thing that we use during install, because again, during install, we don't care about all that extra metadata. It's really only for publish time that we get that kind of full prettied up manifest. So both of these need to have the added feature to look at the package source.json, and read package JSON fast needs to only do it if it's the root package.json file. So I think the place to start, since we need to have it in two places, is to actually just create a new standalone module that, like, you give it a package.json, it looks for a source. If it finds the source, it runs the extension and the fetching and everything. And if it doesn't, then it just returns that data, and then we can use that to to read the package JSON.
Cool. Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Yeah, but also maybe for the RFC itself, Christine, I know you've been here for the last few ones. So if you want, we can just like move it out of the agenda for now. And of course, you can follow up with the items that we just mentioned, maybe checking for the time and those feedback, but maybe just wait for some implementation to start now. It can be from either you, someone else from the community, someone from the team.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you can definitely put it off the agenda, but I still will try to make it next week. So not going anywhere.
Awesome.
I have
something
in the back of my mind, which I might write an RFC for shortly. But yeah, let's move on.
You can also join these calls even if you don't have an open PR.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Because I kind of feel that I'm using NPM so much that it's valuable to give some feedback or like a different view on what I would like.
Yeah, I talk on these all the time, and I haven't opened up a single actual PR, so definitely could continue to come.
Awesome. All right, so I guess with that, we can move on to the next item. We have here the NPM font depth. It's one I know we discussed this before, and I'm pretty sure we come to a conclusion last time. I just wanted to make sure it is the case so that we can properly follow up with the RFC itself. So Isaac, do you wanna, or maybe I can just talk about this one.
Sure.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, the place we landed up last time is that we're moving away from that as a flag. We want to use less that and more the -- all flag instead. So I think for the purpose of NPM font, The thing to do here with this RFC is to tweak it to use --all instead. But for npm fun, we want it to default to true, unlike ls that we are tweaking for v7. So here in this case, I think it will be support to --all false, and then you would get only the first level, the top level dependencies.
Yeah, that does mean setting depth, changing the all config to it's like very inside baseball. It means changing the all config to from a binary to a trinary. So if it's undefined, we use the default behavior, and if it's explicitly false, then it's always false. And so there's no change for other commands, but then fund, if it's undefined, it'll use it as true.
Right, makes sense. Yeah. See. Cool. So I think it's fine to just take the action item of following up with the PR there, right? And with that, we can move to the next one. So we have here number 195, RFC for check engines requirements on every install. Isaac, I think you follow up on that one.
Yeah, I did. I'm not sure what this is. I think this is complaining about a problem in npm 6, where it doesn't perform the engine check when installing from an empty node modules folder with a lock file, because the v6 lock file did not include that metadata. In npm 7, the lock file does include that metadata, and if it's missing, we actually recheck for it. So I think it's probably mostly fine. The only situation in which we won't check is if you have a module in your node modules folder and it's in the lock file, that because we're not even going to reevaluate that additional metadata. Or if you have a module in node modules and one of its subdependencies which satisfy their requirements, or have some invalid engines and input engines restriction that's not met. Because in those cases, we don't actually explore that part of the dependency tree, right? We say, okay, well, these deps are all met, so I don't even need to look at them any more closely than that. I think that might be fine, and if so, this is like, yeah, that's how it works in v7. So there's not much to say about this. If we do need to do that full recheck, I don't think it's something we can do at install time, because it'll really slow down, adding a new dep when you have an existing node modules tree. But we could maybe add it to like npm doctor or some other command that just checks, does a scan of your whole node modules tree.
For what it's worth, and then maybe you have stats on this, I don't know anybody who regularly runs npm doctor, so throwing it in there is maybe not necessarily the most effective if the idea to help people's like day-to-day workflows. So
I have never even heard of it.
Yeah, it's not very widely used.
It's not because it's there's not a criticism of it, but it is pretty slow. Like it's got to do a bunch of stuff. So I understand why, but also like getting folks to run a command that is knowingly fairly slow is probably not going to fix this type of problem, I don't think.
Right. I mean, maybe another place to put it would be the npm ls output, right? So have ls do an engines check and then warn. We could do that relatively easily. And I know people run npm ls to kind of like as sort of a faster form of a doctor command.
Right. But it's a command that is already so complicated, right? Make it even more.
Well, so I think adding it to ls wouldn't be so bad. We would just run the checks and emit the warning. We still wouldn't actually like change any behavior or break anything. So it adds some code, but it doesn't add a lot of like changes to user experience.
If it's just going to be like a warning, just like a little bit of copy to std out, is that still something that would be like super disruptive for install?
Well, we already do that at install time. If you're
Okay.
if we're adding that module or if we're evaluating it. But if it's, like I said, if it's a thing that's already in your node modules tree and it's fine, then we don't explore that part of the tree because it's fine. So we got other stuff to do.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay.
comment already put on the PR. We'll see where that goes.
Awesome.
Move on
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next one. We have a few more items today. So, right, we have this large one on open source paid forward system, number 197. And I think it's is it yours, Bert?
Yeah, it's mine.
Okay, cool. So maybe you can make an introduction. Also introduce yourselves. We had no introductions today, so feel free to also introduce yourself.
I'm Bert. First time in a meeting like this. I do use open source daily and I use NPM daily, so very interested in seeing how this process goes for new features. So I wrote one of these RFCs for solving an issue with funding. Currently, people can put a fund property in package.json, but that requires companies to see, oh, this package has a fund, so I'm gonna check the link and then go to their Patreon and give them this much money every month. But that requires to do that for every package, so it's high friction for a company to do that for all of the packages that require a fund. And this is trying to solve that. So essentially, there's a kind of broker in between where you say, I want to give back to the open source community, like, I don't know, to €2 a month, €10 a month. And then that broker works as a proxy during an NPM install, or let's keep it simple to begin. They work as a proxy and they see what packages you install. And then they divvy up the funds that you allocate, like that €2 a month. They divvy that up to how many times you install every package that has a fund property in their package.json. And all those little bits add up. And then at the end of the month, the broker says, okay, for this package, you get €500. For this package, you get 1,000. Yeah, that's the gist of it. An initial version would be something where NPM provides that. So NPM would also be the broker, but in essence, the broker can be a separate system, can be some commercial company that says, hey, we'll provide these services for the open source community, so companies can hire us to divvy up the funds for them, and we use AI, or we use number of installs, or we use number of installs, but combined with how many stars it has on GitHub or something like that. Like every broker could decide how they divvy up the funds, and then people can, or companies can choose which broker they use to divvy up the funds. And then one additional one was to give more of an incentive for companies to do this. You could have another license. So like a package or a library could update their license to say it's a, I think I called it like a pay it forward license or something, where they say you can use my library for free. It's open source if you use it for non-commercial use, but if you want to use it for commercial use, you need to at least pay €2 back to the open source community, not to me specifically, the library owner, but to the open source community. And since that is part of the license, companies that try to use that library to be in line with the requirements of that license, they would have to pay that back to the open source community. So it could be a driver for getting more funds back to library creators.
So
Awesome. I see. Wes has his hand raised first. You can talk next.
I'm not sure. I'm not going to speak for NPM on this because I think this is a really broad RFC. So there's a lot of aspects. Maybe Isaac, do you want me to go first? I know.
No, you go first.
So first, have you heard of Back Your Stack? It's an initiative by, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know it.
Okay, it's an initiative by, oh, now I'm blanking on the name of the company. Yes, that's the one. Yes. So they're doing something kind of like what you're talking about, operating as like the broker, I guess, is what your, terminology is. Would be something definitely interesting. Yep.
In the RFC, I call it accountant, just to get the nomenclature correct. Yeah, let's call it accountant.
Cool. So anyway, check that out because I think it's really cool, and I totally am on board with the big picture ideas you presented here. And I think so is the Open Collective and their Back Your Stack thing. I think it's sort of alignment. So it might be worth your time just do some research there. Mm-hmm. That said, I think the RFC is a little too broad. In my opinion.
I think we lost the signal a bit.
We're about to lose. Yeah.
It's a very long broad. Yep.
I know he's connected from a satellite connection, so it sometimes gets flaky.
If I have Google Hangout meetings all day, no problem. Zoom is so bad.
Okay, you're back. You're back now.
You're back. Yeah.
Zoom is just so bad. So anyway, I was just saying, I think if you could focus a little bit more on the technical aspects, like if NPM had metrics hooks that could report to multiple endpoints or something that was a little bit more meaty on the CLI implementation, that would make me feel a lot more comfortable talking about this RFC, because this RFC covers just a ton of stuff. Like you would need to say, here's a broker willing to implement, because like getting NPM, anyway, that's where it goes into I don't want to speak for NPM, but like, I think that this is a great idea where there's a lot of merits, but there needs to be some focus on technical features, I think, for this RFC for me to really be able to interact with this RFC in a way that would be productive. That's my feedback.
It's a good point for the metrics. One of the things we thought, I think you can do that right now, have a proxy to NPM where you cache packages and stuff on your own local network. That's something that's currently possible, right?
Yeah. There's all manner of proxies and private registries and.
Right. So if an accountant does that, then the technical aspect of that is solved, right? We don't need like to create a whole API with NPM to fetch all that data, or do you think that's still required?
So yeah. So this is just to kind of echo some of what Wes was saying. This is a very broad RFC, and the way that I read this. I don't think that there's nothing for the CLI to do differently, right? It's essentially all happening server side.
Yeah, one small part I think is where it installs packages. It would check if the license is in agreement. So if it would check if the company pays enough monthly to cover the requirement of the licenses as an opt-in.
Yeah, even that could be a server side thing, or it might be overly tied to one particular provider to do in the CLI, right? You kind of want that, because if it's doing the license enforcement client side, it's easy to circumvent
Yeah,
if somebody wants to be using the license.
Yeah, we thought about that as well. It's never we're never trying to force companies to do anything. It's just they want to be in accordance with their licenses. Otherwise,
right. So the other, I mean, the bigger thing, even if you don't worry about people circumventing it, we assume we're all acting honorably. Even if you make it just a warning, you're putting the warning in front of the person who can't really solve the problem. So, I'm a developer at Netflix and I run npm install and I get this thing and it says, oh, you're out of compliance with the license. And I go, okay, maybe I should email somebody about that. And then I go back to work. A more effective approach, which
from personal experience there, pushing through strong support for open source funding as I see is difficult. So I just totally agree with Isaac here. Being that engineer at Netflix and wanting to fund open source, it doesn't mean I can just flip a switch and we're suddenly, compliance with the license requirement there.
Yeah, it very much sounds like somebody else's problem, right? And I mean, this is different from, for example, security notifications, where a warning at install time is putting it right in front of the person who's like in the middle of this thing and ready to fix it.
Right.
So and also understands what's being asked of them, or is more likely anyway to understand what's being asked of them, and so on. So I think that a more effective approach is probably to do that, do that tracking and compliance verification server side, and then like send an email to the operator that's like, hey, you basically only chase down the big offenders. So if Google is installing your thing enough and they owe you, $10,000 a month, well, you go after them and you don't worry about, some tiny startup that's technically owes you $2 a month. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. It's not worth the cost of chasing them down.
Right. And then put that at the accountant's site, since there you have the email address of the person that does the funding, essentially.
Right. So the other thing about this, about if you have the accountant as a separate entity and they're running an npm proxy, but this package is published to the open source public registry, there's really no way to to require that people only go through your proxy in order to get your package, unless you only publish it in that proxy, which is, presents some challenges. Right now, you can't depend on it with open source projects and so on.
Let me give a counter example there. If someone puts a license and says you cannot use it commercially, but pushes it to GitHub, then that's exactly the same thing, right? If someone still uses it commercially, they're just not in accordance with the license. That's their problem. If there's ever an audit from their company or from a company that looks to acquire them and they see, oh, you're using software without proper licensing, then they have a problem. So we're not trying to enforce anything. It's just
but it's more about the accounting getting out of whack, right? So if the default place where I install packages from is not going to be tracking this info, then that makes the whole accounting process challenging. So I think that the answer here, or maybe kind of the next step, so the direction is that this is really more of a business partnership proposal between GitHub, GitHub or the GitHub NPM product team and Open Source Pay It Forward or Open Collective or some other group. And I know that there are conversations around this, there's a lot of ideas and product stuff that's kind of already in process of being ideated and developed and tested for GitHub sponsors and for hooking that into the npm funding info. The other thing I wanted to maybe put on your radar is License 0, which has a parity and prosperity licenses. essentially parity says you can use this for free as long as the thing you're doing is open source. Otherwise, you have to pay me for an exemption. And prosperity says you can use this for free as long as the thing you're building is free. Otherwise, you have to pay for an exemption. And then license 0 kind of acts as like the license broker. But there's no, there's no tracking or accounting, and the payment requirements are subtly different from open source pay it forward, because you're not requiring that they pay into a proxy that's going to get allocated or distributed. You're requiring that they pay you.
Yeah, but that doesn't solve the main problem. It's good to get it on my radar, but
it's similar in structure, but the payment allocation is different. There's no reason why. Now, the thing with that I like about license 0 is the licenses are created by, or have been crafted by some of the honestly the most experienced legal minds in open source. So they're pretty airtight. The other thing is it's very flexible about what counts as adequate payment in order to get an exemption. So you could take the license 0 license and say, well, we're going to be, the way that you get an exemption is by paying into this sort of broader fund, which then gets allocated based on reasons.
That would be cool.
But in both of these cases, so I mean, I would explore that as just kind of a particular legal instrument for how the license works, and something that is, likely to be enforceable and kind of has at least a little bit of analysis put in it. Maybe more, maybe less than what you've already done. I don't know exactly, but the bigger issue is that this is probably something to take to kind of the GitHub GitHub sponsorship team or the NPM product managers, rather than, because I don't see much that the CLI has to do differently here.
Right.
I see Miles, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, just hi, I'm a product manager over at GitHub who works on NPM. If you want to find time to chat one-to-one, I'd be happy to chat with you. I will be honest, I do a lot of my work in open source foundations and have a very different idea of sustainable open source than many folks do, but I also recognize I've worked for many corporations on open source, so I'm also coming from a very different place, but just kind of throwing my bias out there to start with. But one thing that I think is important to point out here as well is there is ongoing contentious debate around the definition of open source, which is currently owned by the OSI, and whether or not some of these licenses, which require payment for certain things, like these license 0 licenses that Isaac is talking about, whether or not they qualify as open source. That's not to say that they're good or bad. It's not a value judgment, but I do think it would probably be good to, if you haven't yet, and maybe you have, do some research into kind of the existing debates, discussions, and where that's landing. And if you ping me, it's just my name at github.com. I can try to dig some stuff up for you, but how you frame it will be important here, especially if you want to be talking to lawyers or folks who are working on this stuff at a professional level, because if you frame it as open source, you may get a lot of pushback. Now, with that being said, there's lots of people who still think that this can be open source, but there's a whole process of going through and having a license be accepted as official by the OSI. I'll stop rambling, but that's something that might be good to do some more research into, and I'm happy to point some resources in your direction.
Cool, thanks.
So, I mean, I like this because it is at least sort of aiming at what I call the $20 bill problem. With GitHub sponsors and with kind of the NPM funding and a lot of the Patreon stuff, because we're just sort of sharing it's like developers asking for payment from other developers. And with very rare exception, it ends up being a relatively small pool of people passing the same money around. So I get $20 a month for my open source, and then I take that and I spend it on somebody else's open source, and they take it and they spend it on somebody else's, and nobody's actually getting their rent paid except for 2 or 3 people at the very top, right? And I mean, Cinder Sorhus is probably one of the only NPM users who's actually paying his bills with open source donations. There's small number of others who, you know, maybe supplement or are able to kind of justify working more on open source than they would otherwise, but it's not actually paying like tech salaries that you could get if you were to not work on open source, right? So the financial decision is still like, I should just be working on proprietary products, or I should find a company that wants to fund the project I want to work on. Like, you know, like my case. So the only, you know, and part of the challenge here is that the companies with the groups with the most money to spend on this, like figuring out what open source Microsoft or Google or whoever else are even using is really challenging. And then figuring out how much they should spend on each one is challenging. And now you've got the procurement problem of like, you know, are we really going to go through this, our bulky procurement department's process for you know, $30 a month bill? Like, no, just throw it in the trash. Like, it's not, you know, it's not worth the time. So you basically have to come to them with like, okay, here's like $2,000 a month that you need to be spending, and we'll make sure that it goes to the right places, and this will get you into compliance on these, you know, 5,000 packages you're using. So like, if you don't have that kind of roll up, it's really, really hard to make any progress in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're trying to solve, like lower the friction for companies to give back and get everyone a piece of the pie.
And also, you know, the license change also increases the friction for them not to give back, which is important because they have, you know, they can't just spend money because it's the right thing, because they have shareholders who have invested their money, and, you know, like, unless there's a financial reason to do it, a lot of companies actually have kind of an ethical obligation not to. You know, we could not ethics in the sense of like broadly what is right and wrong, but ethics in the sense of like, they've made an agreement to do a certain thing and now they have to follow that. If you give them a license, like, hey, look, you're in danger of being sued, and so now like the fiscally responsible thing is to pay this bill.
Definitely, if the bill, like what we're proposing, is that some library owners might put $1 a month in there, and then the company is only obliged to pay $1 a month. But if every company that ever uses that package pays $1 a month, it's still a large amount.
Right, and if you're using 1,000 packages like that, and it's getting allocated in some relatively efficient manner, then it starts to look reasonable. But if you got 1,000 bills for $1 a month, you'd probably just not pay them because it's not worth the time.
Oh yeah, the proposal does not require them to add up, but that we could still look at that if that's needed or not. But it would just be $1 a month, and it just gets them. It's a bit like getting your credit card information into your app store. Once you went through the process of paying something, then the whole payment process is set up, and then it's a lot easier for the company to say, oh, maybe these open source packages are worth more to me, and it's just increasing that amount. It's not setting up the whole process again for another developer.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think next steps here is to kind of pursue more of like the server side and corporate angle.
I see Christian and Miles have raised their hands.
Yeah.
And then we should probably move
on. I am kind of going off the rails here, but I would say it's hard to convince my boss to give a certain sum of money to open source every month, even though we do contribute to open source. It's just, I don't know. I would imagine it would also lead to a lot of interesting questions like, why do you use so many packages, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And the thing that I'm kind of wondering is, first of all, does this need to happen in NPM? Maybe like, I don't know, a GitHub action or something would be just as nice. Or what I'm also thinking is like, when you have like the launch party or like the go live, maybe you could get some kind of like report, like the packages you benefited the most from. And then maybe companies for just one time would be willing to give a significant amount of money. I don't know, just my thinking when everybody is kind of like, we launched, it's cool, it's a one-time commitment, we can see it helped us. I don't know, just a thought, because like
maybe.
sometimes I just install a package to try something and I get rid of it immediately. Because I notice it's not the thing. Do I want to give something to that?
Yeah, that's also a good point. Number of installs would then be a metric for that, I guess. And that's also a good argument that you give for not adding up the amounts, because then you put the burden on the developer. Hey, why are you installing that this much? If you don't do that, then it just stays at the most expensive package that you installed. That's the upper limit of how much you have to pay. And then they can still go for, hey, why did you install that one package? Because it's expensive. But yeah, that's the choice of the library owner then to put that high amount there. Then yeah, he'll get less use out of his library.
All right, let's move on to peer-specific overrides.
I see one. I just noticed Miles had raised his hand for it. Do you have anything else to add, Miles?
Very quickly, and we don't need to dig into it. I just want to prod that installs are not necessarily the best metric. Some people install something once and then have it running for millions and millions of requests in a month. So just something to think about. People who are testing locally may install a whole bunch of times. I don't think it's necessarily the best metric. The other thing to consider is perhaps separating how payout happens and how collection happens. As Isaac was saying, for some companies, a single contract for a large sum of money once a year may be a better way to pool resources. So, especially if it's not tied to a license, it could be, hey, we're funding this organization that funds open source. Just another angle to think about it.
Awesome. Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it up. Otherwise, we won't get to any other issue.
No problem. I have all the info I need.
Yeah, I appreciate Bert. Yeah, and we can follow up in the RFC itself. All right. Yeah, let's just move on to at least the next one. I know it's an important one that Isaac wants to talk about, which is RFC number 210, RFC peer-specific overrides. I know Killian just joined. I wonder if maybe Killian want to make an introduction. Otherwise, I think it's fine to let Isaac go over.
Yeah.
Killian, you go ahead.
Is my audio work? Good.
Yep.
I didn't have time for a complete sound check, so my apologies if it's not too good. Anyways, basically, it's about the. I'm sorry. Yeah. Give me 1 second. It's about the old ANIC with how the peer installs weren't really mandatory. That all you got was a message, and that's basically it. The rest of the program. And now with the new way of working, and there are actual issues raised, and no proper installs formed if the peers don't match. And depending on the development environment you have, you can't match those peers, or the mechanism to get those peers matched is not worth the additional effort. As an example, like many TypeScript utilities will have no upper limit set, but the similar matching that NPM does will reject development versions and pre-releases, which I don't think is bad, but which can cause problems like that. So the basic idea is of a way, to have an override specific to peer dependencies. The main reason I would say is because there is an existing RFC for overrides, but it's still very early stage and it's very complex. So it will take time until that could arrive. And in my opinion, it would be important to support a peer override early on. Yeah, that's the basics.
So yeah, so I think if we're going to contemplate this, the main thing that I would want to dig into is figure out what does a peer specific override feature have that the sort of core overrides feature doesn't. Because I do think that we're going to have an implementation soon of overrides, not super soon, but in an early 7.x release. That's kind of the plan. And what I don't want to do is get into a state where that somehow conflicts or is an confusingly similar to peer overrides. The second thing I was going to bring up was so we do have this legacy peer deps flag, which you can use today in v7. That'll install it just like npm 6 would have, where it just ignores peer deps entirely. And in doing so potentially creates an incorrect or subtly broken package tree. And in probably the next v7 beta release, we're going to have a much better explanation of okay, this is the peer dep that conflicted. Here's what it's a dependency of. Here's the thing that you depend on. These are the two things that are colliding with each other. Go fix it or run with legacy peer deps. So so then kind of the other thing that I was wondering is if there's some other, maybe subtler way that we can solve this problem. For example, if we resolve peer deps in such a way that we allow pre-releases, that might actually fix the whole TypeScript issue that you just brought up. And since peer deps do tend to be, or ought to be, sort of a broader dependency range anyway, if you specify a peer dep of 12.x and my root dependency is 12.1.2-beta, then right now it'll treat that as a conflict because that beta tag will not match on 12.x. However, I think this is actually already brought up in another channel. I don't recall, I think on Slack somewhere, but if we allowed pre-releases in peer deps, then that would actually make things a lot easier. And Semver, that's a relatively easy thing to add. Obviously, that will be a problem if there is no other peer dep, no other thing depending on that peer dependency. So, for example, I have this peer dep of 12.x, and then a beta ships, and let's say that's the only reason it's being brought in is because of the peer dep, and then a beta ships. Now I'm going to start pulling in the beta version that might be sort of unstable. So there's a little bit of I have a pending task to write up an RFC for that, just so we can kind of dig into some of those concerns. Yeah, so that's basically my take on it. I'm mainly the big pushback is how does this interact in a world where we have overrides and peer overrides, and what does it give us that overrides doesn't?
Yeah, and I noticed Wes raised his hand.
Yeah, I hesitate with my bad internet, but it might be worth taking a quick look. I know this is something I've talked about with my Java colleagues about, Gradle has a bunch of features around dependency resolution like this because they have a much worse dependency resolution story than Node. But you might want to check out some of the stuff that they have. And I think that overrides actually solves all of those problems. I've been comparing it to their platform. And I think they don't have the peer depth problem, but it's the same style of problem that they have when they need to provide basically an alignment rule, I think is what they call it, right? Which is where two things depend on slightly different Semver range. And I say Semver ranges, but it's not always even Semver range, but it's two different ranges. And they want to align them, right? Which is really what you're saying is I have a bunch of things with TypeScript with a whole slew of different peer depth ranges. What I want to do is align them all to be one, right? And I think the override spec actually allows for that. It might be a little verbose because you may have to like call out a bunch of specific dependencies. But even the way it stands, I'm pretty sure you at least can do it.
Well, with the override spec as it in the RFC right now, it's you could just say TypeScript, version X, and it will be anything that depends on TypeScript anywhere in your project will get that version.
Yeah, I guess TypeScript is maybe a bad example because you'd only want one. Yeah, I guess I meant like if there was situations where you needed multiple for some reason, like TypeScript and React are probably bad examples here, even though those are the most common peer deps. But something where it was like, it was all right if you had multiple, but you would like to prefer,
right. So ESLint and Babel are some other ones where we see a lot of peer deps that are just using it as a library. And the peer deps are actually kind of overly strict in a bunch of these cases. And I think overrides would solve those problems. Another way you said Gradle doesn't have the peer deps problem. I'd actually phrase that as Gradle only has the peer deps problem because all of their dependencies are flat.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, Killian, do you have any more anything else to add before we close up this topic?
The overrides would certainly solve this issue. It's like it just depends how long, like the estimated time is for this the other overrides to arrive. One thing though about the legacy peer deps flag. Legacy peer deps is as a global flag. They would. Well, I don't know if that even matters too much. Well, anyways, overrides would solve this itself. So if overrides are like in the near future, that's a non-issue. If they aren't, that's the question. Then it becomes one.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm eager to get to overrides as soon as possible. It doesn't just solve this. It actually solves a handful of other kind of very sticky problems where users do want to be able to override things, and it's similar to like the Yarn resolutions, which is a very popular feature there. Yeah, and I have pages of like diagrams and pseudocode from our previous discussions of override. So I think we're actually in a pretty good place to start implementation on it. It's just that we've been fixing data bugs instead, which is sort of higher priority. Once V7 goes to GA, probably sometime in mid-September, like the next couple of weeks, overrides is kind of the next big feature that we're going to start tackling.
One thing, Killian.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just like, is there a way to contribute like directly to overrides, or is there a preferred way? Let's say it that way.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty like in the weeds in Arborist, which I mean, I see that you've already kind of dived into that code base a bit. So yeah, I would say I'd recommend let's sync up on either the Node.js or Node tooling Slacks or the OpenJS Slack, anywhere you can find me. And we can try to sort of figure out like what's a way to start tackling it. I honestly haven't even begun like slicing up how the implementation would actually work, because sort of the spec for the algorithm needs to be worked out first. But I would suspect it's a couple of weeks of work. It's not months.
Okay, that's great. Then I'll start looking into that, and we'll see what the result is.
Cool.
So I just want to say, though, I think Killian brings up a great point that as soon as you go general access with installing peer deps, all these people are going to come out of the woodworks and be like, hey, I've got all these conflicts. It tells me I have 30. What am I supposed to do? And you are going to get a pretty, I would bet, a pretty big influx of support requests. So you might consider like what that looks like, because I think if you just even look at the output here that is in the RFC, it's like, yeah, if I was just a random, UI engineer with a TypeScript project and I saw that, I'd throw my hands up in the air and say, what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing is like about kind of what the functionality that we have right now. When we have an error message that explains it in a little bit more human understandable terms than just unable to resolve package tree, that will make things a little bit better. And having that error message also print, look, you can run with this flag and you'll be fine. I think the majority of the people who encounter that will just take that advice, right? They'll just add that flag and they'll go on with their work and assume that everything's okay. Which honestly, if everything was fine in NPM 6, then it will keep being fine with legacy peer deps, because it's exactly how it works. This is auto installing peer deps is really more of an issue for like new projects that have a peer dependency or have an old outdated dependency they're not even using. So a couple of the cases where, where we found those conflicts in our early testing, we reached out to the package authors and like, hey, I'm getting this error. What do you say? And they're like, oh, I shouldn't be depending on that, and remove it. So I think you're right. Like, we will get people complaining. There will be more call for overrides as soon as 7 goes GA, but a better error message will do an awful lot to assuage that.
Right. So with that, being mindful of time here, I think we have to wrap up the discussion. But thank you, Killian, for showing up and talking about that. We appreciate the contribution. All right. And sorry, I know Meta proposed a couple of issues we were eager to discuss and been following on YouTube. But time's up. There's no more time, but I think we're going to try to put that in the beginning of the agenda for next week. So to all of you, you're all welcome to come back again next week. And anyone else like Meta that was just following on YouTube, you can always find the Zoom link on that issue that we usually post, and we tweet about it before that call. So that's how you find the link to join next time.
So the add registry identifier to publish prompt, and the new command npm clone that I know Meta was following. I posted comments on both of those, and I think they're all probably, we can move forward with most of them. The registry per package on the same organization is also really interesting. Expect some notes on that, and I'd love to talk about next time.
Awesome. All right.